So as you're coming up with your ideas, if you recall, we went over this page where you kind of listed the features of your objects. So this is another thing that I encourage that you refer back to. Again, it depends on everyone's object, but when it comes to like designing floss, things like how is the floss cut, right? That might lead to an interesting challenge. And again, this is all in the guise of hoping that you guys don't get stuck coming up with ideas. So if I'm thinking about how it's cut and thinking about this being a product for kids, then I start to think about like, okay, where's the blade? What does it look like? Like, is there a chance the kid's going to get cut? So it's like, could there be some sort of like manual button that there's maybe like a blade on the inside here that maybe we don't see if the floss comes out this side? Can this just kind of be like you like press it and it slices the floss? So it's like, these are some of the ways that I want you guys to start thinking through this process. And I don't know, so if like this is a window, maybe this is where the floss is, we can see it. Maybe you can then see it spin and there's something fun there. I don't know, maybe there's a picture on this disc. The idea I ended up going with is maybe there's like an arrow, so it's like the number of times it's spun, so you know how much floss you need. So maybe this one isn't so much about fun, it's more about like teaching them flossing. So okay, make sure the arrow spins around twice before you rip the floss, that's how much you need. Or maybe it depends on the user, they can count the number of times. And then again, thinking about like safety, so maybe this cuts. But then of course thinking about like, okay, the lid, so maybe this needs some sort of door here that protects the floss, that when this opens, the floss is then accessible and is protected. Think about all those like product design stuff we talked about when it comes to sketching. I strongly encourage contour lines. Anyone want to remind me what a contour line is? Yeah, so that shows the curvature of I would say of a surface or a face. So if this is a straight line here, it's saying, hey, this is flat. What this also does is it shows, you'll notice that this arrow, it goes through the center, this arrow is slightly back. That's because in my head, it's behind a piece of clear plastic. So it's recessed in space. This comes back. All of this is going back to our vanishing point. But again, I'm using my underlay to help me out there. Again, contour lines are optional. Now, if you're doing this 10% marker thing, it's probably a good idea to start to think about your render. So the one difference today in what I'm showing you, when we render this, I'm going to do like a full-blown render. For these 10, again, it can kind of be a light render and light shadow. So at the bare minimum, hit your 3-face with a marker. But hopefully maybe it's like just a little bit more than that. After I do the full-blown render, I'll maybe do an example of what I think a light render is. So if you're doing this 10%, especially if you have clears, start to maybe plan where your highlights are going to be, right? And then that way, when you start to ink it in, you can try to, we can purposely avoid the areas where you want your highlights. Also, don't forget all of the basics we talked about on day one. Sit up straight, draw with your arm, rotate your page. Again, really the best thing you guys can do is just like that straight line warm up over and over again. I probably don't harp on that enough. So when it comes to this part of the project, if you want to, I encourage everyone to warm up. Take 5 minutes, not necessarily now, but before you do your 10 redesigns. Your sketching will be better if you take, again, even just like 5-10 minutes to do a page or 2 or 3 of straight line exercises. Especially if you have a lot of ellipses in whatever it is you're drawing. So here, like as I have my highlight here, I'm going to start to avoid drawing over this. And I can think about some texture on the inside here, maybe, of like where that floss is. Again, don't forget, show radiuses with double lines. It makes your product look more real and more believable. One new thing I'll teach you guys. Also not a requirement, but it's fun to do arrows. Yeah, that's the nerdy teacher thing to say. You could do arrows for your product design. Arrows help explain how things work. So for example, if this is a big button that can be pushed, I might have an arrow pointing at that. So arrows like this, where something opens and it pivots, this is just like kind of the start of a cylinder, right? You can think of it like that. So like for example, let's say this thing spins around. You can draw two big ellipses like this, pick where the arrow starts, and maybe pick where it ends by drawing a triangle. And then if you go over this slightly darker, I have this on another page, I'll show you guys. You can start to shade in here, and then you have like a very quick, simple arrow, but I feel like it can add a lot to whatever you're doing. So if you have anything that like rotates off or spins, again, not a requirement, but it's going to make your presentation look better. And of course, last but not least, the orthographic. All you need is two views. I'm looking for accuracy between the two of them. So if I have a button that sticks out on the front here, so firstly, proportionally, this would probably be a little bit higher. So ideally, you're starting your orthographics with your 10% also before you're going straight into ink like I am. But if there's a button and it's sticking out, you're probably going to see a little bit of it here on the front face. And because I'm doing third angle orthography, this is the top view. This is the top of the object, so this is the top view that we see. Cool. Any questions on this kind of like process, this layout? It's a bit of a recap, I guess. I'm assuming this is not new to anyone right now. All right. Is that going? I'm assuming that's going. Okay. So basically, I want to re-show you guys clear and gloss when it comes to materials. I guess a quick recap on materials. If we go with circles. So again, there's matte, gloss, and reflective. Some properties of this is softer, this is harder, so like in contrast, higher contrast, low contrast, and then this is like the highest, I guess I'm going to just say highest contrast. And like reflections. So this rendering that I'm about to show you, this is more in line of what I'm expecting on the final. Okay, so again, for the 10 redesigns, it can be a little bit lighter. Just to like attempt to quickly show you guys this with pencil. I realize this is a sphere, so it should really be doing something more like this. Leaving a kind of a hot spot there. With gloss, you start to get a bit of a coarse shadow, so a reflection on the bottom. Yeah, if anyone needs paper, feel free to come up and grab some. Right, so you get a bit of coarse shadow. It's like the table is reflecting up into here. And then when it gets to the highest contrast one, you might start to get a little bit of like the sky reflected in the top. And then sort of like a really more crisp coarse shadow. And in fact, the coarse shadow may start to reflect, random objects on the horizon. And if I take it a step further, That's fast. That's good. If the ground is yellow, then it might start to pick up a little bit of that yellow within there. Does that make sense? As a very basic breakdown. So again, this is more what I'm expecting for the final. All right. So with this guy, if we want to start, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a nerd. So the mayor from The Nightmare Before Christmas has two faces. One looks like, one says like happy face. I don't know what this other eye looks like. I think it's like that. And then his angry face. Looks like this. So you can draw whatever face you want in here. I'm going to go with the happy one. But so you'll notice I left this white line here. I'm sure you guys know why, but let me phrase that as a question. Why do you think I left that there? Right, because I want this to be a clear gloss cone. I want it to be a little bit I want it to be reflective, so I'm leaving all the line work clear there so that it reflects back at us. Maybe on this ortho, I can do the angry face to show the concept, right, of what's going on. You could also do that in a lighter marker. Okay, so the way that I would start this, I'm going to take my accent color, and I'm going to start by coloring the inside of the face, just so that when I start to draw the clear and I put the marker over my accent color, it starts to push it back in the background. So if you have anything that's clear and you have something inside of it, I think my advice is to do the clear outside last and the clear inside first. So I'm going to start with my yellow marker. I'm going to avoid where this highlight is. And actually, I'm trying too tall. I don't want to hit the floss. If you hit the floss like I did, not a big deal. Everyone check what's underneath your object. Make sure it's a page that you don't mind ruining. And then maybe like a couple more yellow passes on the right here, just as a basic cone to kind of like have it wrap around. Next up, I'm going to take my 30%, and like I said, start on the inside. I'm going to color the base. So I'm leaving this gap here, because right now I'm coloring the inside floor that this face is sitting on. The reason that I'm leaving this gap here, this is representing the wall thickness of my clear object, so I want it to be pure white, because that is where the glass is thickest, or the plastic is thickest, so it's going to revert to its pure color. Again, I'm going to leave this gap here because I want this highlight to come all the way down. So to me, this constitutes as like starting with coloring in the inside. You could color the floss, but my advice right now is to leave it. I wouldn't do the floss just yet. Is everyone still with me? Let me know if I like go too fast or slow. All right, so that's the inside of the clear, and again, that's how I encourage anyone who has clear in their final object to start. Next up, we're just going to hit kind of this low-hanging fruit of the hat and the base, which is just, I'm going to treat as kind of like a satin, maybe kind of like an opaque. So staying with my 30, I'm going to do a stroke starting from this right side, tapering, or like going to the inside here, and I'm just going to kind of lighten my pressure as I get to where this highlight's going to be. And I did that in 3. I'm going to then spin my page, and I'm going to do the same thing coming back this way. And actually, for me, this is my most comfortable way to throw it. And just leaving, letting my marker trail off there, and kind of whatever happens, happens, is how I'm treating that. And just by naturally starting on the edge and throwing the marker in, you kind of get a natural gradient because there's a little more ink here from where I started. My pressure and my speed picking up here creates kind of a little more of a natural gradient with my 30. That's going to work better with more ink, fresher ink in your marker. Next up, I'm going to do the hat. So I'm just going to do a couple 30s across the base. Whenever you can kind of do like nice long strokes, I think your marker is going to look a little bit better. If you bleed out of your line work a little bit, not the end of the world. Another trick you guys could try is starting with marker and then doing line work after. It can help, cover up mistakes like this where I just kind of went a little bit out of the lines here. And then the top, I'm just going to go the same way. And really, that's kind of just all an even spread there. And we'll come back once the ink dries a bit. We'll come back and we'll punch it, maybe with a 50 or so. But that's just how I would start this process. Yeah. When we get to the more rectangular one, I'll do a recap on 1, 2, 3 lighting. So, are there any questions so far? Rendering a cone is very similar to rendering a cylinder. You just have to keep in mind that the edges are tapering in. So like basically as you render this, your rendering does something like this, right? If you have like low lights and highlights, I mean, I kind of did the highlight already for you guys by leaving this line work, but you can see that it kind of pinches. So on the left side of my highlight, it follows this left wall. In the center, it goes straight up and down. So if anyone's rendering a cone, try and keep that in mind. All right. So staying with my 30, next up we're going to do the glass, the clear part. So, but I'm going to try and avoid this wall. Again, I like to keep, when it comes to clear objects, I like to draw the wall thickness, and I like to leave the wall the pure color that you want it to be. In most respects, I just go with white because it's like sort of like a crystal clear. So I'm going to take my 30 and I'm going to start on the bottom and just run it up, trying to avoid the wall here. And I might go again a little bit lighter just slightly to the right of that. And then again, where my highlight ends, I'm going to run my 30 up, working my way all the way to this edge. I'm going to try and stay a little bit lighter and quicker on the inside and a little bit slower and heavier on the outside to just try and get a bit of a natural gradient as I do this. So these are quick strokes. And as I get to this edge here, you know what, keep it quick. If you started to go slow and heavy, that's okay. The reason why I'm changing my mind is actually the slow and heavy should be a little bit off center. I did 3 more strokes right about there. Anyone want to guess why I did that? Why did I change my mind? There's a term that we learned. It starts with C. Core shadow, yeah. Indecisive. That is also possible. No, it's because yes, Diana got it right. It is a core shadow. And I forgot about it. So the core shadow makes it look a little more glossy because we have this huge highlight planned already. This is telling us that this is a pretty glossy object. If it wasn't for that and I was going for something a little more matte, and I was decisively going for matte from the get-go, then what I originally said would make sense, where you get darker on the right side here. All right, is everyone still with me? Any questions? So at this stage, I would take my 50. You can take your 50 if you want. And I'm going to put a low light right here, kind of opposite where my highlight is. And I'm going to try and just do this in 2 strokes. I'm going to keep the stroke wider at the bottom and have them meet at the top. So I'll just quickly show you what I mean on this here. That's my first stroke. Then my next one is going to start here, and it's going to end here. And again, if we think about the cone, it's because it's wider at the bottom and more narrow at the top. One thing I forgot to mention that, again, it's a repetition that I encourage everyone to do is photocopy your 10 redesigns before you render them. And I'll show you why in a minute when we're done rendering this. So I'm going to run a 50 up here and then a little bit off the side. And there, I guess that ended up being about 3 strokes wide. I kind of did 2 here. Again, it depends on how much you want to punch this contrast. But now I start to get this kind of like core shadow and this hopefully like wrapped look. Now, my highlight's feeling a little bit wide to me, and maybe I want just one more kind of reflection in here. I'm just going to take my 30 and just run up another real, again, light pressure, just a little bit inboard. And then I'm going to try and make a really narrow line, just slightly inboard here. It's just a little bit more of a reflection. Try not to overwork it. It's almost, honestly, this line almost overworks it a little bit. But I just want a little bit more reflection through that. You could make an argument that it doesn't make sense to show this gloss because of the face on the inside, so you could probably take a more matte approach. If I wanted now to be indecisive and switch gears and go more satin or matte, I could probably put some yellow on the inside here, complete the face, and run a 10% on this white gloss to make it a little more matte, so that the gloss is not fully obscuring what's behind there. The reason I tend to choose full gloss for clear is when you layer with clears and you make things like highlights obscure what's behind it, it helps communicate that there is a surface in front of that. So that's often why I choose to default to a high gloss highlight. All right. Honestly, not much more to do than that when it comes to the clear back here. The rest to do is, now that our ink has started to dry on our hat and our base, I'm going back to my 30, and I'm just going to kind of, like where this low light is, I'm just going to pick up a little bit of that on the base. You could do it with a 50 if you wanted. It would be a little bit more glossy. Try not to be like me, and especially on your final. Like on your 10 redesigns, stuff like this is okay. But try to avoid it on your final if you can. I'm going a little bit quick now, and I'm being a little careless. I'm going to take my 50 and just color the, actually no, sorry. I'm going to take my 30 and color the bottom of the hat a little bit slower this time. I'm going to save my 50 for doing the inside of the hat. And now the top of a hat is a bit of a sphere, so I'm going to give the top of the hat a bit of a core shadow. I'm just going to take my 30 and a little bit inboard from this right edge. I'm going to come up with a marker and then taper to the left a little bit. Gives it a bit of a core shadow. Show of hands, how many people have their white pencils still? Oh, I'm impressed. Okay. I expected there to be no hands. If you want to get your white pencil out, if you draw a little bit of a circle there, you get a little bit of a nice highlight on the mayor's hat. For me, I'm going to take my 50. I'm just going to punch this a little bit, base just a little bit darker, maybe just like one line there. If you're like me and messy on the bottom, you can take your Sharpie and try and correct that. Just know that chasing edges with a Sharpie is a slippery slope. You don't want to overdo it. The worst thing you can do to a mistake is highlight it and make it even more evident that you've made a mistake there. Now the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to color my arrow. If you guys want to do this with your accent color, you can. So I have two yellows. Again, I've talked about this. It does make your life a little bit easier if you have a darker and a lighter. So this is kind of like a fun, nerdy trick to do with clears also. So I'm going to take my darker yellow and I'm going to stop when I hit the glass here. And then I'm going to take my lighter yellow and I'm going to draw where the arrow would be behind the glass. And that effect may not, it's really subtle. It looks bad. Here, I'll show you. What that does is, again, if you have anything going behind your clear, if it looks a little more faded, a little less saturated, it's going to look like there's something clear in front of there obscuring it. So the reason that I told you guys to photocopy your work is rendering is kind of an exploratory process. I did not just magically come up with this right now in front of you guys, and it's like, oh, I'm amazing, I know how to render. No, it's like I still need to explore. So like, for example, this is what I did first. And there were some mistakes I wasn't happy with here. So like, I completely neglected the face on my first pass. I ended up using pencil to kind of try and differentiate the surface and the texture. So that's something else you guys could do. But I also didn't like the purple, really. It just felt a little bit off to me. So like I explored it again and was happy with this kind of more consistent layout. So the reason I'm showing you guys this is to hopefully that you guys understand that like rendering is a bit of an exploration process. Don't expect to just render and hit it on like right off the bat. I mean, you can, and I know you guys have that ability to do it. It's just, if you have a photocopy, if you're not happy, you can at least go back and redo it. And it depends, like maybe the first 2 might be a little difficult, but then by then you might hit your stride and the final 8 might just go quicker. But here I think this like arrow red shows a little better through there with the clear. You do not need to render your thumbnails. They can just be pure line weight. Last but not least is the shadow. Honestly, too, guys, I would recommend just a little bit of pencil again on top at the end. If you just like take a little bit of pencil here on the outside, maybe underneath the bottom of the hat a little bit, just to punch it a bit darker. Again, especially with your final, this is going to help. It's just going to make sure you have enough contrast. And literally 30 seconds of pencil is going to bring your object a long way. Like I might take my white here and just hit a bit of the top of the floss, avoiding where the low light and highlight is. But pencil over marker, I think, in my opinion, always looks good, and it always just pushes the product, just the rendering just a little bit further. Another thing that I'm leaning towards more for myself is also doing the shadows with pencil. So here, when it comes to a cone shadow, just as long as you make sure that this back is an ellipse like this, that's roughly what your shadow looks like. I don't really need to draw an angle line because it's up to me to determine where the shadow is. And again, keep in mind the shadow goes off to the right. And why is that? Partly, but there's a more, where the light's coming from. Because this is where the highlight is. If I threw a shadow off to the left, Noah's taking up points, if Noah notices, which hopefully he does. And then when it comes to shading the shadow, it always looks better if it's a little bit darker and kind of fuzzes out towards this edge back here. Again, simple shadow. You could do drop shadows on everything if you wanted. I'm okay with that. Cool. Any questions on this? Great question. You could, for me, it's not worth it. It's simple shadow. The hat, honestly, I feel like the hat would actually be a detriment because there'd just be this like round blob and it might look kind of funny. No, that's okay. Yeah. Yeah, if you do a drop shadow, just as long as your light's coming like kind of from the top. So maybe let's transition to a quick recap of 1, 2, 3 lighting. Yeah, good questions, guys. So if you have a cube, and you want 1, 2, 3 lighting on this cube, if you're doing a drop shadow on this cube and you're bringing this shadow now to the floor, as long as this is your one face, I don't care if this is your 2 or your 3, that's okay. If you have like a cone or a cylinder and you want to do a drop shadow, again, as long as as long as this is technically your one face, I'm okay with a drop shadow. If this is like your three face and you have a drop shadow and this is your one, so that would tell me your lighting's coming from the left, the drop shadow no longer makes as much sense. But yeah, quick recap on 1, 2, 3 lighting. Again, avoid the smears. If this is another concept, you're really sad. And even sometimes you want even 2 pages to capture smears. If you're like, especially if you're really heavy with your marker, you want to avoid that. So again, quick recap on 1, 2, 3 lighting. Your one face might be your 10%. Your two face might be your 30. And your three face is likely your 50. And I have a lot more ink in my other, or sorry, in this marker than the other two. You could also leave your one face pure white if you would like to do that. I don't know why I feel the need to throw a Sharpie on this. I think to clean up my messy edges is why. Again, when it comes to coarse shadow on the cube, on the three face that's in the top left, the table is picking up a little bit of a reflection here. The way that I've seen the two face treated is, I'm blanking now. I think it's a darker from the top coming down, like a slight gradient. Again, considering that the table might be reflecting a bit. Or you could do a gradient coming up, either way. Even on matte, doing a slight coarse shadow, I think always helps your object look a little bit better, in my opinion. Okay, with that said, does everyone still have attention bandwidth for this guy? Okay. You have no choice. Okay. We could take a break if you guys want it. All right, so this one is more, the reason that I did two is I wanted to show you guys the cylinder and the cube. This is more cube-like. Has a little bit of steamroller wheel going on the top here. Let me look at my handy-dandy pre-planned reference. All right, same thing. With this, I would start with the inside of the clear. Because this concept is a little bit different, there's just kind of like this wheel on the inside. We can ignore the wheel unless you want to color it yellow. But I wouldn't. So I'm just going to start with my 30. Now, when it comes to a reflective object like this, I tend to leave like these corners, I tend to leave pure white. Again, because it's kind of like the edge is catching light. If you observe objects, sharp objects, like if anyone can see the projector, at least from my vantage point, the brightest white part is this top edge that's rolling over the surface. Oh, nice. Okay, which book? Okay. Scott Robertson. That's logical. That makes sense. So it's like, yeah, because wait, tangent would probably reflect the light, maybe. But yeah, that's a good point. So edges are the most tangent to your vision. Chances are it's going to pick up that highlight, and that's why. So yeah, thank you for that, Brent. I've never heard that verbalized, and that is a good way to explain it. So that is why that I tend to leave this pure white as I work on this. So that is to say that I'm going to start with coloring the inside floor of my clear. So I'm taking my 30%. And I'm avoiding where this wheel is. And again, I'm avoiding where this edge is. And that's how I'm going to start this, by coloring that in. Next up, so that was my 30. Next up, I'm going to do this base. So if we think about our 1, 2, 3 light, which of course I've immediately misplaced that example I just did. Here we go. I'm going to treat the base similar to this cube, where the face with the button is going to be a 2-face, and the face with the door is going to be a 3-face. When I drew this, I didn't realize how much complication this door was going to add. And actually, now that I'm looking at this, what's wrong with this door proportionally? It's too long, yeah. I didn't notice that. So just try and catch that stuff. I don't know. Your redesigns do need a shadow, or is there? Why do you ask that? I disagree. We will talk about it in a bit. But yeah, you're right. I probably should have planned that a bit better. I do agree with you. Yes, no, we do need shadows. Simple shadow. Shadows can be really thrown short. I guess I can address that now. So my plan for the shadow is, if you start with your angle line, is to throw it here. Again, the photocopy is blue out. I did this with 10% marker to start with. So here's a printout from my scan at home. You can maybe faintly see there's a bit of a planned shadow here. But we'll work on that together after. But no, that's a great point. Try and plan for where your shadows are. And yes, you do need shadows. So I'm going to start with, I don't know what's funny with that. Sorry. We're going to start with 10%. So I learned from coloring in my exploded view something that happened that I wasn't happy with. I'm just like the king of misplacing papers constantly. Anyway, when it comes to coloring this in with your 10%, my advice is to not try and avoid the button or the arrow. That gets a little bit trickier when, like, let's say this was a 50, then I definitely would want to try to avoid the button because it's going to get muddy if I color over it. But especially with the 10%, whenever you can, just get full even strokes. So I'm starting from the left and going up to the right. Whenever you can get full even strokes, I encourage that. It's going to just make your shading a little bit cleaner and neater. My 10% is running out. I'm sorry, if you guys don't mind, I'm going to take a quick break. All right, we're at a 37-minute long video right now. Again, it's just for reference. You guys don't need to. Hopefully it's helpful. Yeah, I don't know if you guys can you see this on screen here? My marker, yeah, this is why you don't refill over your over your page. Thankfully it landed here. Okay, so that was my 10% there. Again, sorry about that slight intermission. So that's my 10% on my 2-face. My 1-face, I think I was going to be pure white, I guess, at this stage. I'm going to take my 30%, and I'm going to start on this back edge and color from right to left, but with my page upside down, because this is my comfortable way of throwing my lines. And again, I'm just going to ignore everything, including the floss. It's just, I think that's my preference, is whenever you can get a full stroke, just go for it. It's always going to look better. Now this door, in practicing and planning, I realized it's actually a lot more complicated than I realized. So the way I would treat this, I mean, in some respects, I can flip it and say this is a really good exercise for 1, 2, 3 lighting. So now that I'm at 30% for my 3 lighting, anything that's facing, any face on the door that's pointing to the right is going to get my 30%. So it's going to be this inside here, it's going to be back here, and it's going to be this thing down here. And this is why I think 1, 2, 3 lighting works so well. It's just like, even just that basic, hitting that 3-face with my 30, I think adds a lot of 3-dimensionality right off the bat to that door. When it comes to simple shading, like kind of what I have now is kind of close. If I put a little bit of marker in the top here, that would probably be good enough, for the 10 redesigns. But again, I can come back and address that. I'm going to grab my 10% now, and I'm going to hit my 2 faces with it. So any face in the door that's pointing to the left is going to get the 10%. So it's this bottom edge down here. this edge in here and this back edge here. And honestly, I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm going to leave all the one face as white. Planning ahead, there will be a shadow that's going to cross over this door, but we'll get to it later. So it will be darker over here at some point. Cool? Everyone still with me? All right. So that's the basics of the base. No pun intended there. Next up, we're going to do, or that's not really fun. Then we're going to do the clear next. So staying with our 1, 2, 3 lighting, I'm going to take my 10%. And now, you know what? I'm going to use my 10% on this wrapping face first. And then we're going to punch it up to a 30. But the reason for that is I just want to block out where my highlight is. So I'm just going to take my 10%. And in this gap up here, I'm just going to I'm basically blocking out that, hey, I want a highlight to be right there in between the two 10% marks. Next up, I'm just going to run my 10%. Maybe back to front is maybe better. You can try and avoid that back wall if you want, or color over it, not a big deal. So I just went on the top there with my 10%. I'm going to switch to my 30 now, and I'm going to run my 30 down this right side. But again, I'm going to flip the page, and I'm going to go back to front. I'm going to try and avoid this back wall as I do this. I'm going to do my best to stop, finding a speed that kind of works. Now, if I start to think about my core shadow on this face, again, looking back to this example, it's in this top corner. So I'm going to start to, even though this starts to rotate, I'm going to throw a core shadow kind of here, below where this highlight is. So I'm still with my 30, I'm going to run a line from here coming down. And again, for me, that means rotating my page. And then a line going left to right. And then I'm going to just do a couple at an angle to make this kind of triangle shape up here. And again, all with my 30. And again, all trying to avoid this edge here. So if that was a bit quick, I'll just repeat what I did. So I took my 30, I went back to front, working my way down. Then after I took my 30, I ran it up this front edge here. I ran it back this way, and then I did a couple diagonal lines here, going slower and heavier at this top corner and getting lighter as I work my way away from it to try and get a bit of a gradient on there. I'm now going to do something very similar with my 10% on the front here. So I'm first going to block where my reflection is, and I'm going to go bottom left to top right. And I'm trying to kind of get this to align a bit here. Where this top highlight is, I'm trying to get this to align to that edge. Now I'm going to do another one. I don't have a good explanation for this, but I'm going to make this more of a triangular reflection. I think it just looks a little bit better. So I'm going to do a 10% that starts a little bit closer to the base of this one, but my goal is to end here. So that's what I'm talking about. It's a bit of a triangle shape. I think it's it makes the reflection look a little more random, in my opinion, and I think that's the best way I can verbalize why I do that. And then just like we did on this face where we had two highlights, I'm going to take my 10%, give a little bit of a gap here, and just kind of do another. So I got two highlights on this front face. And again, what I'm doing is I'm creating this gap to kind of say, those are where I want my highlights to be, and I'm going to try and not color within there. And really then, once you have those defined, I'm going to take my 10% and just color in the top left and the bottom right. And I'm just going to try and do even strokes. I'm going to do my best to avoid this white gutter if I can. So then same here on this back edge, I'm going bottom to top with my 10%. And then I'm running my 10% up and curving to get that back edge there. You'll notice that bottom to top maybe wasn't the greatest because I have these like start and stop marks where the ink is heavier when I first touch marker to paper. Maybe it would have been better in retrospect to go left to right. So again, this is why you photocopy, you learn some of these mistakes, but we can fix this. We'll add a little bit more contrast. We'll throw a darker marker to cover up these start and stop marks. So just like we did with a coarse shadow here, I'm going to run a bit of a coarse shadow on this here and pump the contrast a bit. So I'm going to take my 30, and right where this edge is, I'm just going to run it up here. Not only is it to cover up these start and stop marks, but it's just to push the contrast a bit further. And again, with my 30, maybe I can take another dab. And now everything above where this marker I just laid down, I'm just going to try and color that in with my 30. Learning from the mistake I made, so going left to right now with my 30. And again, it's just kind of getting a coarse shadow on that face too, is what I'm doing. If you ever punch it too far, I could come in and hit this with a 50. Maybe don't do that. I'm going to experiment and see what it looks like. So I'm going to take my 50 and run it up here. This is up to you guys at this point, whether you want to do this or not. You can see what it looks like on mine. I'm doing the same thing with what I did with my 30 before, but now just with my 50 on that face. I don't know, I kind of like it, so I'm going to leave it. Again, it's up to you guys whether you want to punch your rendering that far or not. The top I might leave. Let's see, I might take my 10% and just go a little bit slower, just to get a little more of a highlight on there. Cool. Let's see, I'm going to take my 30 now, and I'm going to come back to the base, and I'm just going to like, on the inside here, where this door kind of sets in just a little bit, I'm also going to throw a bit of a coarse shadow on the inside there on that door. So I took my 30, I went to this bottom edge where the door starts, I went up, I went from left to right, and then I did a couple diagonal strokes just inside that door. And what that does is it pushes it back in space. It makes it look like it's recessed slightly. Same thing now with my yellow for my accent color. I'm going to color in this arrow. I'm going to color in the button. And now because I have two yellows, I have a more pale, lighter one. I'm going to use the pale, lighter yellow to color the inside behind the glass so that hopefully it looks like it is recessed in comparison to the yellow out here. If you don't have two markers, you could also get, if you have like old colored pencils lying around, you could get a yellow color pencil and that can really help push things too, presuming you're doing yellow as your color accent. Here, because I use my darkest yellow out here, I can take my black pencil and just kind of like darken this edge if I want to make it look like that's like wrapping up and around. To match my other drawing, I can also use my yellow on my arrows here. The other thing you can do with one marker, again, is just think about pressure, speed. That's how you can get variation in color. So now I might use my white to kind of like try and repair some of this bleed in here, and just use my white pencil to color in this edge. If you want, if you have a paint pen, you can do the exclamation mark. In this case, I might do it up here in this corner. It just like adds like a little bit more of like a random reflection appearance to it. You know, maybe back here too. This is maybe more of an eye. Again, not necessary, but it just adds a little bit more. I mean, you could honestly, if you're doing random reflections, just like random white dots in one or two places also work. It makes it look a little shiny. All right. Oh yeah, sorry. With your white, I would also then hit this floss too, just to make sure, just to bring it forward. White pencil works best on gray marker or any dark marker. It kind of will pop things forward. Now, last but not least is the shadow. So, yeah, Viviana brought up a really good point. I did not leave a lot of room for the shadow. So what I would do is I would then cast a shadow like really, like as a more noon style shadow. So the lighting is more above the object. So when I take my direction line, I'm going to hit tangent to the outside of my steamroller wheel really lightly, because again, with these drawings, I want them to be nice and clean. I don't want a lot of heavy underlay lines. I can also look at my reference. That's going to take me 20 minutes to find in my stack of pages. Haha. I can look at my reference here and see, you know, roughly what this shadow looks like, and I can use that to guide me when it comes to plotting this shadow. So like I can see this line coming out, so I could maybe even copy that. Maybe that's my direction line. You know, maybe there's a line back here, but I know that this top is like curved like this, so it's probably going to be an ellipse coming around like that. And again, it's a simple shadow. As long as it looks correct and you're kind of using, you know, an educated guess, and the shadow is as wide as the object, that's probably close enough. So again, by casting the shadow at a pretty severe angle straight down, we can make sure that it fits in there. So this is how I would start it. I would start it, I'm going to draw it more clearly for you guys on this page. That's how I'm approaching this shadow. And again, this curvature, it's representing an ellipse that is likely being cast down into here from this back face. I mean, it's really a combo of the front and back face. It's like something a little bit like that, with probably some straight lines in between them, if we're being technical. But again, as long as it's, I'm going to call this like a gravestone shape. So the shadow is a bit of a gravestone in here. Now here's where it gets tricky, or if you're a nerdy teacher, really fun. When the shadow passes over this door, it's going to change height and where it is. So another way to think about shadows, especially if they're crossing over objects, is you can think of them as a contour line. So if I take this pencil and run the edge of the shadow here, this is where it starts. Now when it hits this wall, it travels up it and goes across. So I'm going to draw a line that's above this one. Then it runs down. Then it runs across. Then up. And literally that is a contour line that I just drew across that surface. Does that make sense to everyone? And really the last step now is to just then, again, my process is to do all my shadows with pencil. Is I can now come and start to like really color this in. As it changes on these faces, just be sure to like punch it a little bit darker. Like I punched it a little bit darker on this 3 face on the inside of this door. And then again, behind the object, I'm probably going to take a darker, heavier shadow. In this instance, since I'm using pencil, I am going to try and avoid the floss. White pencil on black pencil doesn't work as well as white pencil on gray. I don't know, that shadow's pretty even to the object. You can always then if your shadow is bleeding into your object, you can use varied line weight to push your object forward in front of the shadow. So I'm taking a Sharpie here and I'm just running it there in front of the shadow to just kind of push the object more forward. Cool. Any questions? So again, this is what I'm expecting for your final. I'm expecting this level of rendering. When it comes to the 10, I know I'm showing it on the 10 redesigns, but I'm just using it as a tool. Now that said, if you do this level of rendering on all your 10 redesigns, like your project will look really good. Again, this book is used for applying to your program where you want to go. So that's set, the reason I bring that up is my minimum requirement is light shading and shadow, but if you want to go above and beyond, it's going to help your chances getting you into your program. Let's see, let me quickly try and show you guys what I mean by simple shading and shadow. So like if I were to take this and just be like, all right, it's 10 p.m. on Sunday night after Thanksgiving break, and I have to do 10 redesigns. Let's see, does it specify whether it needs to be colored or not? You know what, if you guys don't want to render this for Monday, that's okay. If you want to just do 10 redesign line work, that's all right. It's up to you. I would encourage to bring in at least maybe some that are rendered, ideally on a photocopy, so that if I say it's all wrong, you don't have to redo the whole thing. The reason why I encourage to render some is then you can get some feedback on your rendering. But the minimum requirement for homework points is just line work. But let's talk about what a light render might look like. I would take my 30. Let's see if I can do it all with one marker. Same thing, start from left to right. Get the hat. Maybe a little bit darker here. Maybe just a core shadow on the top there. Get this a little bit darker. Kind of ignoring the face behind here. A little too heavy because I started. And then, I don't know. I would say you need at least the 50. If I was patient and I let this dry, I could probably do it with just the 30, but I'm feeling impatient. So I'm taking my 50 and I'm just going to run. And then basic drop shadow. The only detriment to this render in terms of its quickness is now the concept is a little bit lost. The face in there kind of disappears. So again, I could maybe use my pencil to bring that in a little bit. And then again, because the photocopy didn't get it, I'm going to draw part of the happy face.
So you mean it's kind of like, it works against you, because one of the reasons you render is to show more film, and this kind of render kind of makes sense of that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you could make an argument, I mean, for the light render. Yeah, absolutely. You want your rendering to show your design, right? It should help, not take away. So that's a really good point, Sam. I mean, in some respects, so like I'm trying to show that it's clear, but maybe again, this high gloss clear is maybe not helping my cause. And if it's photocopied, that means I can load it up and try again. So maybe with that in mind, if I want it to be a little bit more clear, let's try again. So here's my 30. Here's my hat. A little bit darker on the inside. Here's my core shadow. Then maybe all this needs is just like, with the lightest pressure possible, a bit of a core there, a bit of a core there. And then make sure to take my pencil and to show my full concept. draw in the face here. And I mean, if I wanted maybe just a little bit of a shade on this cone, just to wrap it just a bit. And maybe that shows a little bit more information, a little bit less muddy than this one. Is that clear? Cool. Any questions on anything?